I am not moving my patrol car. You are refusing a lawful order to produce identification. That is obstruction. Step away from the SUV, turn around, and place your hands behind your back.
No, please, officer, don't do this. He's just helping me.
You are resisting, then. That's another charge.
I won't turn around for a false arrest, officer.
The morning glare. The crisp morning air in the quiet suburban cul-de-sac of Oakhaven carried the scent of freshly mown grass and brewing coffee. The sun, already climbing high enough to cast long, slender shadows, glinted off the chrome of a sky-blue SUV. Beneath its raised hood, Brian Campbell, a man of 38 with a build honed by years of carpentry and a calm, reassuring presence that belied his impressive stature, peered intently. His brow was furrowed in concentration, but a faint smile played on his lips. He enjoyed these small acts of neighborly kindness, especially for Eleanor Vance, his spry, 72-year-old neighbor. Eleanor, a widow with a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes, was more like family than a neighbor. "Just a sec. Eleanor, looks like the battery's completely dead," Brian called out, his voice a low rumble that always managed to soothe, even when delivering minor inconveniences. He meticulously connected the jumper cables from his own sturdy pickup truck to Eleanor's ailing SUV. His hands, strong and capable, moved with practiced ease. He'd jump-started more vehicles than he could count, a common rite of passage in a neighborhood where cars, like their owners, sometimes needed a little extra coaxing to get going on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor, a wisp of a woman with a perfectly coiffed silver bob and an irrepressible twinkle in her eye, hovered nearby, clutching a floral-patterned mug of tea. "Oh, Brian, you're a lifesaver, truly. I swear, this old beast has a mind of its own." She chuckled, her voice carrying a slight tremor of age but full of genuine appreciation. "I was just about to head to the grocery store, and then poof, nothing. Thought I was going to be stuck here all day watching reruns." Brian grinned, the sun highlighting the faint lines around his kind eyes. "No reruns for you, Eleanor. We'll have this old beast purring in no time." He double-checked the connections, his focus absolute. He always took care, whether it was building a custom bookshelf for a client or, in this case, ensuring Eleanor's car wouldn't short-circuit. It was simply how he operated, with thoroughness and a quiet dedication to doing things right. From the street, the scene might have seemed innocuous. A younger man, African-American, leaning into the engine bay of an older woman's SUV, jumper cables draped across the hood, a perfectly normal tableau of neighborly assistance in Oakhaven. But perception, as Brian was about to discover, could be a dangerously subjective thing. A sleek, black sedan with tinted windows, belonging to a newcomer to the neighborhood whom Brian hadn't yet had the chance to meet, slowed to a crawl. The driver, Mark Jensen, a man in his late 40s with a penchant for early morning jogs and a nervous disposition, squinted through his windshield. He had moved into Oakhaven only a month prior, drawn by its reputation for safety and order. He'd heard stories, seen reports, about rising crime rates in other parts of the city, and a seed of anxiety had taken root in his mind. Now, seeing a large, unfamiliar black man bent over an SUV in front of an elderly woman's house, his imagination, already primed for trouble, began to construct a narrative far removed from reality. He didn't see the familiar embrace of community. He saw a potential threat. He saw what he expected to see, rather than what was actually happening. Eleanor, sensing a prolonged operation, decided to offer some refreshment. "Brian, you want some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That'd be great." "Eleanor, thank you," Brian replied, not looking up, his voice slightly muffled by the engine. Eleanor, delighted to be useful, bustled into her house. The interaction, brief and normal, did nothing to alleviate Mark Jensen's growing unease. He saw the woman disappear, leaving the man alone with the vehicle. His mind, already racing, conjured images from news reports, from crime dramas, from every worst-case scenario his anxious thoughts could generate. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed. "Yeah, hello. I'd like to report a suspicious activity," he said into the phone, his voice hushed and urgent. "There's a man. Looks like he's trying to hotwire or break into a car. An older woman just went inside. He's alone with the vehicle now. It's on Elm Street, number 14. Yes, African-American male. He's got, some cables. Looks like he's tampering with it." The dispatcher, calm and professional, took down the details. A potential vehicle theft in a usually quiet neighborhood. A priority call, coded for immediate response. The gears of the system, unknowingly, began to turn, set in motion by a glance, a prejudice, and a well-intentioned but profoundly misguided phone call. Brian, oblivious to the unfolding drama, finally got a good read on the battery terminals. "Got it," he muttered to himself. A small triumph. He pulled his hands back, wiped them on a rag he kept tucked into his belt, and stood upright, stretching his back with a groan of satisfaction. Just as he was about to reconnect the cables fully and try the ignition, Eleanor reappeared, a steaming mug in hand. "Here you go, strong and black, just how you like it," she said, beaming. Brian took the mug, his fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. He took a grateful sip, enjoying the rich aroma. "Perfect, Eleanor. Thanks." Suddenly, a siren, faint at first, then growing rapidly louder, pierced the morning calm. Both Brian and Eleanor looked up, puzzled. The sound crescendoed as a patrol car, its lights flashing a stark blue against the clear sky, turned the corner and sped directly towards them. It skidded slightly to a stop, pulling up directly behind Brian's pickup, effectively blocking any movement. The sudden, jarring halt sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Brian, though surprised, remained calm. He'd seen police cars in the neighborhood before, usually for kids playing too loud or a lost pet. He figured it was just a routine check, or perhaps a neighbor had reported a stray dog. He took another sip of his coffee, assuming he'd simply need to step aside for a moment. He couldn't have been more wrong. The driver's side door of the patrol car swung open, and a young officer emerged, his hand already resting on his duty belt, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. He was a man in his late 20s, lean and sharp, with a gaze that seemed to pierce rather than observe. This was Officer Ethan Vance, barely 5 years on the force, but already carrying himself with an air of absolute authority. He was quick to make judgments, quicker to act on them, and fiercely proud of his badge. He had received the dispatch call. Suspicious activity, potential vehicle theft, African-American male, 14 Elm Street. The details had solidified into a narrative in his mind, one that he was now prepared to confront. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," Officer Vance commanded, his voice sharp and carrying across the quiet street. He didn't ask a question. He issued an order. The warmth of the coffee mug in Brian's hand suddenly felt cold. The morning glare, which had seemed so benign moments ago, now felt harsh, illuminating a rapidly unfolding nightmare. Brian looked from the officer to Eleanor, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had been helping his neighbor, enjoying a cup of coffee. The ease of the morning had evaporated, replaced by an unsettling tension. Eleanor, her tea forgotten, gaped at the approaching officer, her hand flying to her chest. "Officer, what on earth?" she began, her voice quivering with alarm. But Officer Vance wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed squarely on Brian, a rigid certainty in his posture. Brian, still holding the coffee, slowly straightened up, his movements deliberate, careful not to appear threatening. The simple act of kindness had, in an instant, been twisted into something far more sinister. The misunderstanding had begun. 2. A badge and a barrier. Brian slowly lowered the coffee mug from his lips, his gaze calm but questioning as he met Officer Vance's eyes. The officer's stance was rigid, his hand still on his belt, his posture radiating an unyielding authority that seemed disproportionate to the scene. Brian, a man accustomed to de-escalating tense situations on construction sites or smoothing over client disputes, instinctively sought to bridge the gap. "Good morning, officer," Brian said, his voice even devoid of any challenge. "Is there a problem? I'm just helping my neighbor, Eleanor, jump-start her SUV." He gestured towards Eleanor, who was now standing frozen by the front door of her house, her face a mask of bewilderment and fear. Officer Vance didn't acknowledge Eleanor. His focus remained laser-sharp on Brian. "Sir, I asked you to step away from the vehicle. Now." His tone brooked no argument, a clipped precision that cut through the morning air. He hadn't asked for an explanation. He'd given a command. The implication was clear. Brian's words were irrelevant. Eleanor, recovering her voice, stepped forward, her small frame trembling slightly. "Officer, wait! He's not doing anything wrong. This is Brian Campbell. He lives just 2 houses down. He's my neighbor. My battery died. And he was helping me." She gestured emphatically to the open hood and the jumper cables. Her explanation was clear, direct, and should have immediately resolved the perceived suspicious activity. But Officer Vance didn't shift his gaze from Brian. He took another step closer, his eyes scanning Brian's hands, then the open hood of the SUV. He saw the jumper cables, but in his mind, they were tools of a potential crime, not instruments of neighborly aid. "Ma'am, please step back. This is an ongoing investigation. Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle and show me your identification." Brian, sensing the rapidly deteriorating situation but still believing he could explain his way out, slowly placed his coffee mug on the bumper of Eleanor's SUV, making sure his movements were visible and unthreatening. "Officer, I understand, but there's really no investigation needed here. Eleanor can confirm everything. My ID is in my truck, just behind your patrol car. I'd be happy to get it for you, but it would be easier if you could just ask Eleanor." He turned slightly, indicating his truck, then gestured again towards Eleanor, hoping to draw the officer's attention to the obvious truth standing right beside them. But Vance seemed unwilling to deviate from his initial perception. The words, "ongoing investigation," hung in the air, a shield against any attempts at clarification. Eleanor, growing increasingly agitated, stepped closer to Vance. "Officer, he's telling the truth. My car won't start. And Brian, bless his heart, came right over to help. He's a good man. He would never do anything wrong." Her voice was rising, a desperate plea for reason. "Ma'am, for your safety, I need you to step back," Officer Vance repeated, his tone now edged with impatience. He finally glanced at Eleanor, a brief, dismissive look before his eyes snapped back to Brian. "Sir, last time, step away from the vehicle. Now." The sun, once a gentle presence, now seemed to beat down harshly, making the air thick with tension. Brian felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He was a man who believed in law and order, respected authority, but this felt wrong. He was being treated like a criminal for helping an elderly woman. The disconnect was jarring. He took a deep breath. "Officer, I am away from the vehicle. My hands are visible. I'm cooperating," Brian stated, his voice still calm, but a subtle firmness had entered it. He wanted to emphasize his compliance while still trying to inject a dose of reality into the situation. Could you please tell me what specific crime you suspect I've committed? And perhaps you could speak with Eleanor. She can verify everything. Officer Vance's jaw tightened. He seemed to interpret Brian's questions not as a request for clarity, but as a challenge to his authority. You're interfering with an investigation, sir. That's a crime. I asked for your ID. Produce it now, or you will be arrested for obstruction. The accusation hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the idyllic morning just moments before. Obstruction? Brian repeated, genuine disbelief coloring his tone. Officer, I'm trying to cooperate. My ID is in my truck. Your car is blocking mine. If you could just move your patrol car, I'd get it for you. He felt a surge of frustration. The situation was so easily resolvable, yet the officer seemed determined to escalate it. Eleanor gasped, her hands now clasped over her mouth. Arrested? For helping me? Officer, you can't, she cried out, her voice cracking. I'm telling you, this is all a mistake. He's my neighbor. But Officer Vance was not listening. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. I am not moving my patrol car. You are refusing a lawful order to produce identification. That is obstruction. Step away from the SUV. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but the intent was chillingly clear. Brian stood his ground, not out of defiance, but out of a deep-seated sense of injustice. He had done nothing wrong. To turn his back and submit to an arrest for an act of kindness felt like a betrayal of himself, of Eleanor, and of the very principles of fairness. Officer, I have done nothing to obstruct anything. My truck is blocked. I can't access my ID without moving your car, and you're refusing to move it. This feels like entrapment. Can you please just listen to Eleanor? The morning sun, now higher, cast long, distorted shadows. The calm had shattered, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the chirping of birds, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. Brian noticed movement from a neighboring house. Someone was peering through their blinds. Another car, likely Mark Jensen returning from his jog, slowed down the street, its occupant openly staring. The private, friendly interaction had become a public spectacle. Officer Vance, his patience seemingly exhausted, reached for his handcuffs. The glint of metal caught the sunlight. That's enough, sir. You're resisting a lawful order. You are under arrest. His voice was firm, resolute, as if the mere act of stating it made it so. Brian watched him, a cold dread washing over him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a deliberate act of power, an assertion of authority that refused to acknowledge reason or truth. He felt the unfairness of it like a physical blow. His mind raced, searching for an alternative, a way to make this young officer see sense. But Vance's eyes were hard, fixed, and unyielding. The badge, which should have been a symbol of protection, had become a barrier, impenetrable to common sense and human decency. Eleanor let out a small, desperate cry. No, please, officer, don't do this. He's just helping me. Her voice was a fragile protest against the inevitable. But it was too late. The words hung in the air, unheard. As Officer Vance advanced, his hands already on the handcuffs, the quiet cul-de-sac of Oak Haven, usually a haven of peace, was about to witness an injustice that would reverberate far beyond its manicured lawns. 3. The inevitable handcuffs. The metallic click of the handcuffs, pulled from Officer Vance's belt, resonated with a chilling finality in the quiet morning. Brian watched the motion, a profound sense of shock and disbelief, momentarily overriding all other emotions. He had never been arrested, never even had a serious run-in with law enforcement. His life had been one of quiet hard work, community involvement, and unwavering respect for others. Now, that life was about to be irrevocably altered by a young officer unwilling to listen. "Sir, turn around, hands behind your back," Vance ordered, his voice devoid of the earlier impatience, replaced by a cold, procedural tone. He moved with a practiced efficiency, closing the final gap between them. Eleanor, her face now tear-streaked and contorted with anguish, tried to intervene one last time. She reached out, a frail hand attempting to grasp the officer's arm. "Please, officer, don't. You're making a terrible mistake. I called him. I asked him to help me." Officer Vance, without breaking stride or acknowledging her words, simply brushed her hand away. "Ma'am, step back. Do not interfere with an arrest." His command was sharp, silencing Eleanor with its unexpected harshness. He turned his attention back to Brian, who stood still, his shoulders squared, his eyes still conveying a mix of confusion and indignation. "I am not resisting, officer," Brian stated, his voice low and steady despite the turmoil within him. "But I have done nothing wrong. You are arresting an innocent man who was helping his elderly neighbor." He held Vance's gaze, hoping against hope that some shred of reason would break through. But Vance's eyes were unyielding. "Your refusal to provide ID and your continued questioning of a lawful order constitutes obstruction and resisting. Now, turn around." He moved to physically turn Brian, his hand gripping Brian's arm firmly. Brian flinched at the unexpected contact, not out of fear, but from the indignity of it. He was a big man, strong, and could have easily shrugged off the officer's grip, but he knew that any physical response, even an involuntary one, would be twisted into further accusations of resisting. He opted for passive resistance, a refusal to comply with an unjust command, rather than an active struggle. "I won't turn around for a false arrest, officer," Brian said, his voice firm, his decision made. He would not make this easy for an officer who refused to see the truth. He would not silently condone an injustice against himself or Eleanor. This quiet defiance seemed to infuriate Officer Vance. His face flushed slightly. "You are resisting, then. That's another charge." He tightened his grip, pulling harder. Brian remained rooted, his feet planted. The standoff lasted only a few agonizing seconds, but it felt like an eternity under the scrutiny of unseen neighbors peering from behind curtains. Officer Vance, realizing Brian wouldn't voluntarily comply, changed tactics. He quickly moved behind Brian, twisting his arm behind his back with surprising force. Brian gasped, a sharp intake of breath as pain shot through his shoulder. He hadn't expected the aggression. The cuff clicked shut on one wrist, the cold metal biting into his skin. Before he could fully process the shock, Vance wrenched his other arm back, and the second cuff snapped into place. The sound of the cuffs echoed in the sudden silence of the street. Brian felt a wave of humiliation wash over him, a burning shame that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with the public nature of this injustice. His hands were bound behind him, his body slightly contorted, utterly helpless. He looked up, his eyes catching Eleanor's. Her face was a portrait of horror, tears streaming freely down her wrinkled cheeks. "Brian! Oh, my God, Brian!" she cried, a raw, primal sound of distress. She took a faltering step forward, but stopped, seemingly paralyzed by the sight of her kind neighbor, her friend, in handcuffs. "Officer Vance, this is outrageous," Eleanor finally managed to sputter, finding her voice through her sobs. "You have no right. This is my house, my car. He's my neighbor, Brian Campbell. I swear on my life he's done nothing wrong." She pounded her fist weakly against her chest, a desperate plea for justice. Vance, now with Brian secured, finally spared a glance for Eleanor, his expression still hard. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. Interfering with an arrest is a criminal offense." His threat hung heavy, a blunt instrument to silence her. Brian, struggling to regain his composure despite the tightness of the cuffs and the ache in his shoulders, spoke to Eleanor, his voice strained but steady. "It's okay, Eleanor. I'll be all right. Just try to stay calm." He wanted to reassure her, to spare her further distress, even as his own world spiraled. Vance then began to pat Brian down, his movements brusque and impersonal. Brian felt the officer's hands against his clothing, a violation of his personal space, made worse by his inability to move or resist. He felt for his wallet, his phone, keys. It was all so routine for the officer, so utterly dehumanizing for Brian. "Anything sharp? Any weapons?" Vance asked, his voice flat. "No, officer, nothing," Brian replied, his voice muffled. Once the pat-down was complete, Officer Vance took Brian's arm, guiding him firmly towards the patrol car parked behind his pickup. The flashing blue lights painted the street in an unsettling strobe. As they walked, Brian could feel the eyes of his neighbors on him, burning into his back. The shame was suffocating. He imagined the whispers, the assumptions, the questions that would follow this morning's spectacle. As Vance opened the rear door of the patrol car, Brian caught a glimpse of his coffee mug still sitting on Eleanor's SUV bumper, a lonely sentinel to a shattered morning. The visual juxtaposition, the peaceful mug against the stark reality of the handcuffs, was almost too much to bear. "Watch your head," Vance said, a perfunctory warning as he pushed Brian gently into the back seat. The plastic bench was hard and unyielding beneath him. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing him in the confined space. The air inside smelled faintly of stale coffee and something metallic, like a used weapon range. Through the tinted window, Brian could see Eleanor standing by her house, a small, distraught figure, watching him leave. Her shoulders were shaking, a silent testament to the pain of witnessing such an injustice. He leaned back against the hard plastic, the handcuffs digging into his wrists. The weight of what had just happened settled over him. He was a good man, a respected member of his community, and now he was in the back of a police car, arrested for simply being a good neighbor. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming, but beneath the shock, a slow burn of anger began to ignite. This was wrong. Fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. And Brian knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this couldn't be the end of it. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Eleanor. It was about the principle. And it was about a system that allowed a simple misunderstanding to escalate into an arrest based on prejudice and an abuse of authority. 4. Inside the system's grip. The drive to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and the low hum of the police radio. Officer Vance said nothing, his silence a heavy weight in the confined space. Brian watched the familiar streets of Oakhaven recede in the rearview mirror, each turn taking him further from the comfort of his home and deeper into a bewildering unknown. The anger. Initially a slow burn, now simmered steadily, tempered by a growing resolve. This wasn't just happening to him, it was happening because of him, because of who he was. And that realization galvanized his spirit. Upon arrival at the Oakhaven precinct, a squat, brick building with an unforgiving facade, Brian was led inside through a back entrance. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the quiet morning. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale, clinical glow over linoleum floors and drab walls. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, disinfectant, and something vaguely metallic. Officer Vance escorted Brian to the booking desk, a high counter behind which sat a weary-looking officer, a woman in her late 40s named Officer Davis. She had seen countless people pass through this desk, each with a story, each with an explanation. Her gaze on Brian was practiced, scanning for signs of aggression or intoxication, but finding none. Brian simply met her eyes, a silent plea for understanding in his own. "Charges?" Officer Davis asked Vance, her voice flat and routine. As she pulled up a digital form, "Obstruction of justice, resisting arrest without violence," Vance recited. His tone clipped and professional, as if delivering a grocery list. He omitted any context, any nuance, painting a picture of a defiant suspect rather than a bewildered neighbor. Brian felt a fresh wave of indignation. "I was not obstructing. Officer Davis, I was helping my elderly neighbor. My ID was in my truck, which Officer Vance blocked." He tried to interject, to articulate the truth, but Vance cut him off. "He refused to comply with multiple lawful orders. Sergeant, repeatedly," Vance stated, his gaze fixed on Officer Davis, implicitly asking her to ignore Brian's protest. Officer Davis, a veteran of countless such exchanges, simply nodded, her pen hovering over the form. "All right, sir. We'll get your statement later. Right now. We're going through booking procedures." She looked at Brian with a flicker of something akin to sympathy, or perhaps just weariness, in her eyes. It was clear she'd heard variations of this story before. The booking process was a relentless, dehumanizing ritual. His personal belongings, wallet, phone, keys, the single crisp $5 bill he carried for emergencies, were meticulously cataloged and placed in a clear plastic bag. Brian watched them go, each item representing a piece of his normal life, now separated from him, held hostage by the system. He was asked a series of impersonal questions: name, address, date of birth, next of kin, occupation. Each answer felt like another layer of his identity being stripped away, reduced to data points in a police database. Then came the fingerprints, ink on his fingers, pressed onto cards, then wiped away, only to leave a faint, clinging residue, each ridge and whorl, a unique identifier, now permanently recorded. And finally, the mugshot. He stood against a gray wall, the flash of the camera momentarily blinding. He tried to maintain a neutral expression, but he knew his eyes, usually so warm, would reflect the confusion, the frustration, and the burgeoning anger. He looked directly into the lens, determined not to let this ordeal break him. As the procedures continued, Brian asked, "Can I make a phone call? I need to contact my family and a lawyer." Officer Davis nodded. "Once we're done here, you'll be able to make your call from the holding cell. Standard procedure." He was then led to a holding cell, a small, sterile room with concrete walls, a single metal bench, and a barred window looking out onto a narrow corridor. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing with a hollow finality. The silence in the cell was deafening after the low hum of the precinct. He sat down on the cold metal bench, the cuffs still biting into his wrists. He stared at the scratched concrete wall, the reality of his situation pressing down on him. His mind immediately went to Eleanor. He knew she would be distraught, blaming herself. He wished he could tell her it wasn't her fault, that he was okay. Then his thoughts turned to his family, his wife, Clara, who would be worried sick, and his 2 college-aged children, who would be shocked and confused by their father's unprecedented arrest. He knew he needed a lawyer, and quickly, after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour. An officer came to the cell door. "Campbell, you've got a lawyer on the line." Brian stood up, a jolt of hope piercing through the haze of frustration. He was led to a phone on the wall in the corridor, a receiver tethered by a short, thick cord. He picked it up. "Hello? This is Brian Campbell." A calm, professional female voice answered. "Mr. Campbell, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm an attorney with legal aid. Your neighbor, Eleanor Vance, called us, quite distressed. She gave us your name and explained the situation. We're already on it. I'm going to start working on getting you released and getting these charges dropped. Can you tell me exactly what happened, from your perspective?" Brian felt a wave of relief. Sarah Jenkins, legal aid. Eleanor had acted fast, a testament to her loyalty and quick thinking. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice, and began to recount the morning's events. He explained about the dead battery, Eleanor's request for help, the jumpstart cables, Officer Vance's abrupt arrival, the immediate commands, his attempts to explain, Eleanor's corroboration, Vance's refusal to listen, the escalating demands for ID, the deliberate blocking of his truck, the false accusations of obstruction and resisting, and finally, the painful snap of the handcuffs. He recounted every detail, every word, every nuance he could remember. Sarah listened patiently, interjecting with concise, pointed questions. Did he ever ask Eleanor for her version of events? Did he verify your identity through your neighbor at any point? Were there any other officers on scene? Did he read you your Miranda rights? No, he didn't read me my rights, Brian replied, recalling the procedure. And he never once asked Eleanor for her side of the story. He just kept telling her to step back. Understood, Sarah said, her voice firm. This sounds like a clear case of false arrest and potentially an overreach of authority. We're already preparing the necessary paperwork for your release. I'm also going to put in a request for all incident reports and, crucially, any body camera footage from Officer Vance. I'll be there in person as soon as I can to arrange your bail. Stay strong. Mr. Campbell, we'll get you out of this. The call ended, and Brian was led back to his cell. The concrete walls still felt cold, the bench still hard, but now a different emotion settled within him. Hope, yes, but also a hardening resolve. He wasn't alone. Eleanor had acted. A lawyer was fighting for him. This injustice would not stand. The system had tried to consume him, to reduce him to a criminal. But Brian Campbell was not a criminal. He was a man who had simply tried to help. And now he had a battle to fight, not just for his own freedom, but for the principle of what was right. The quiet kindness of the morning had been shattered, but in its place, something stronger had begun to form. 5. Laying the legal groundwork, Sarah Jenkins moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned legal professional. The moment she hung up with Brian, her office, usually a beacon of calm amidst the legal storm, transformed into a hub of focused activity. She had been a public defender for over a decade, representing individuals who often found themselves caught in the unforgiving gears of the justice system. She had seen countless cases of minor infractions escalating into major headaches. But Brian Campbell's story resonated with a particularly egregious sense of injustice. Eleanor Vance's distressed call had painted a vivid picture of a man unjustly targeted for a simple act of neighborly goodwill. Her first priority was Brian's immediate release. She contacted the Oak Haven precinct again, speaking directly with Officer Davis, who had processed Brian. Sarah's voice was polite but firm, laced with an undeniable legal authority. Officer Davis, this is Sarah Jenkins. I'm representing Mr. Brian Campbell, arrested this morning on obstruction and resisting charges. I'm requesting immediate bond information and arranging for his release. I also want to formally notify the department that we consider this a false arrest and plan to pursue all available legal avenues. Officer Davis, recognizing the tone of a lawyer ready for a fight, provided the standard bail amount. Understood. Miss Jenkins. Bond is set at $1,500. He's still being processed, but should be ready for release within the next hour or two. Thank you, Sarah replied, already shifting gears. She immediately arranged for a bail bondsman, using funds from Legal Aid's emergency fund, specifically earmarked for cases of clear injustice where clients might struggle with immediate costs. She knew that every minute Brian spent in that holding cell was another minute of dignity stripped away, another moment that fueled the narrative of wrongful accusation. While the bondsman was dispatched, Sarah began the crucial process of evidence gathering. She drafted an urgent formal request for discovery, specifically targeting several key pieces of information. All incident reports and supplementary reports filed by Officer Ethan Vance and any other responding officers. The full, unedited body camera footage from Officer Vance, from the moment he arrived on scene until Brian was transported to the precinct. Any dispatch recordings related to the initial call reporting suspicious activity at 14 Elm Street. Any dash camera footage from Officer Vance's patrol vehicle. A list of all witnesses interviewed by the police. "This is going to be critical," Sarah murmured to her paralegal, David, a diligent young man with a keen eye for detail. "The body cam footage will either confirm Vance's story or expose the truth." "I'm betting on the latter." David, already typing furiously, nodded. "Agreed. And the dispatch call will tell us exactly what kind of suspicious activity they were responding to. If it's vague, it gives us more leverage to argue against reasonable suspicion for the stop itself." Sarah then turned her attention to Eleanor Vance. She called Eleanor, her voice warm and reassuring. "Eleanor, this is Sarah Jenkins. I just spoke with Brian. He's okay. I've arranged for his bail, and he should be out within a couple of hours." Eleanor's voice, though still shaky, brightened considerably. "Oh, thank God! Thank you, thank you! Miss Jenkins, I was so worried. It was all my fault, wasn't it? If I hadn't asked him to help—" "Absolutely not, Eleanor," Sarah interjected firmly. "This is not your fault. Brian was doing a kind, neighborly act. The fault lies entirely with the officer for his actions. But your call to us was incredibly important. We need your detailed witness statement. Eleanor, everything you saw and heard, from the moment Brian arrived to the moment the officer took him away, don't leave anything out, no matter how small you think it is." Eleanor, relieved to be useful, readily agreed. "Of course. Anything. I saw everything. The officer wouldn't even listen to me. He just kept talking over me." "Excellent. We'll send someone over to take your statement this afternoon. Or I can come myself," Sarah confirmed. "And please, Eleanor, if you know of any other neighbors who might have witnessed the incident, particularly if they recorded anything on their phones, please let us know. That could be invaluable." Sarah knew from experience that bystander footage, raw and unfiltered, often provided the most compelling evidence in cases of police misconduct. People in suburban neighborhoods often had security cameras, or were quick to pull out their phones when something out of the ordinary occurred. By early afternoon, Brian was released from custody, his relief palpable as he stepped out of the precinct into the warm sunlight. Sarah was there, waiting for him. She offered a small, reassuring smile. "Mr. Campbell, it's good to see you out." Brian, still slightly disoriented but grateful, nodded. "Miss Jenkins, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't even know what to say." "Don't say anything right now, just breathe," Sarah advised gently. "We'll go back to my office. We need to get your full statement, and then we'll discuss the next steps. But for now, you're free, and we're going to fight these charges." Back in Sarah's office, a more comfortable setting than the sterile precinct, Brian recounted the events again, this time with more detail, more emotional depth. He spoke of his frustration, his confusion, the humiliation of the handcuffs, and the chilling feeling of being unheard. He emphasized Officer Vance's complete disregard for Eleanor's testimony and his own attempts at explanation. He just refused to listen, Brian concluded, his voice still tinged with disbelief. It was like he had already decided what was happening, and nothing I or Eleanor said could change his mind. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. That's a common pattern. Sometimes officers enter a situation with a preconceived notion, and then they interpret everything through that lens, even if it contradicts the facts on the ground. Your case, Mr. Campbell, is a stark example of that. We have a solid foundation to challenge these charges. Eleanor's testimony, your consistent account, the lack of any actual crime being committed, and the officer's apparent failure to properly investigate or de-escalate. We're going to pursue this aggressively. Brian looked at her, a new fire igniting in his eyes. Good, because this wasn't right. Ms. Jenkins, this was fundamentally wrong, and I don't want this to happen to anyone else. Sarah met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. This wasn't just about clearing Brian's name anymore. This was about something bigger. The legal groundwork had been laid. Now, the battle for justice would truly begin. 6. A spark ignites the community. The news of Brian Campbell's arrest spread through Oakhaven like wildfire, amplified by the speed of neighborhood social media groups and the passionate indignation of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, though shaken, was not silenced. From the moment Brian was driven away, she became an unwitting yet powerful catalyst for change. She called her friends, her church group, and anyone who would listen, recounting the injustice with a fiery conviction. "They took Brian in handcuffs for helping me," she'd exclaim, her voice still trembling with residual shock and anger. "That officer, he wouldn't listen to a word I said. He wouldn't listen to Brian. It was like he just saw what he wanted to see." Eleanor's emotional, heartfelt testimony resonated deeply with her neighbors, many of whom knew Brian personally as a quiet, dependable, and kind member of the community. The Oakhaven Neighborhood Watch Group chat, usually a forum for lost pets and garden tips, exploded with outrage. Initial disbelief quickly morphed into a shared sense of betrayal. Brian Campbell? The Brian Campbell who organized the block party last year? This can't be right. Officer Vance? He's new, isn't he? A bit too eager, if you ask me. Eleanor Vance is practically a saint. If she says Brian was helping, then he was helping. Within hours, Sarah Jenkins's request for bystander footage began to yield results. Several neighbors, having seen the patrol car and the unfolding drama, had discreetly recorded portions of the incident on their phones. One video, taken from an upstairs window across the street, clearly showed Brian standing calmly by Eleanor's SUV, his hands visible, while Officer Vance aggressively moved to handcuff him. Another, closer view captured Eleanor's frantic pleas being ignored. The nascent seeds of public outcry began to sprout. One of the first to hear and respond was Marcus Thorne, a dynamic community organizer known for his relentless advocacy for social justice and police accountability. Marcus, a man in his early 40s with a powerful, resonant voice and an unwavering commitment to fairness, operated the local non-profit Oakhaven United. His phone rang off the hook with calls from concerned Oakhaven residents. "Marcus, you won't believe what happened on Elm Street today," a distressed neighbor, Emily Chen, relayed to him. "They arrested Brian Campbell, our Brian, for trying to jumpstart Eleanor Vance's car." Marcus listened intently, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. He had seen this pattern before: an overzealous officer, a marginalized individual, a swift, unjust arrest. But this time, it was Brian, a man whose integrity was beyond question, in a neighborhood known for its quiet affluence rather than its police-community tensions. This was different. This had the potential to truly galvanize a broad cross-section of the community. "Emily, tell me everything," Marcus instructed, his voice calm but firm. "Do you have any video? Any pictures? Did anyone else see it?" Emily quickly sent him the bystander footage she had received from a neighbor. Marcus watched the grainy videos, his anger mounting with each frame. The footage was damning. It clearly showed Brian's calm demeanor, Eleanor's desperate attempts to explain, and Officer Vance's unyielding aggression. There was no visible obstruction, no active resistance. Just a man being arrested for existing while black and helping a white elderly neighbor, a common scenario tragically misconstrued by an officer's biased lens. "This is exactly what we've been fighting against," Marcus declared to his team at Oakhaven United. "This isn't just about Brian Campbell. This is about every resident's right to live without fear of unjust harassment or arrest. If it can happen to Brian, it can happen to anyone." Marcus immediately sprang into action. He drafted a press release, detailing the incident and calling for a full, transparent investigation into Officer Vance's conduct. He posted the bystander videos to Oakhaven United's social media platforms, urging people to share them widely. He also organized a community meeting for that very evening at the local recreation center, inviting Brian, Eleanor, and Sarah Jenkins to speak. The objective was clear: transform quiet outrage into organized action. By late afternoon, the recreation center's auditorium was packed. Neighbors, community leaders, and even local media had gathered. Eleanor, though still emotional, stood bravely at the podium, her voice ringing with conviction. "Brian Campbell is a hero, not a criminal," she declared, her small frame shaking with righteous anger. "He was helping me, just like he always helps everyone. That officer, he didn't care. He didn't care about the truth." When Brian himself spoke, his voice resonated with quiet power. He didn't rant or rail against the police. Instead, he spoke with a calm, measured dignity about his shock, his humiliation, and his belief in justice. "I was arrested for being a good neighbor," Brian stated, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I respect law enforcement. I believe in public safety. But what happened today was not public safety. It was an abuse of power, and it cannot be allowed to stand." He spoke of the fear and confusion he felt, the injustice that gnawed at him. He also spoke of the deep appreciation he felt for Eleanor and the community's swift response. Sarah Jenkins then took the stage, providing the legal context. She explained the charges, the lack of probable cause, and her immediate actions to fight for Brian's exoneration. She also highlighted the critical role of the bystander videos. These recordings are not just evidence. They are a testament to the power of community vigilance. They show the truth when the official report might try to obscure it. Marcus Thorne, a natural orator, concluded the meeting with a powerful call to action. "This isn't an isolated incident. This is a symptom of a larger problem, a lack of accountability, a quickness to judge, and a failure to de-escalate. We demand a full, impartial investigation. We demand that Officer Vance be held accountable for his actions. And we demand systemic change to ensure this never happens again in Oakhaven or anywhere else." The meeting ended with a thunderous applause and a clear mandate from the community. A petition demanding action was signed by hundreds, and a GoFundMe campaign for Brian's legal expenses, initiated by Oakhaven United, quickly surpassed its initial goal. The quiet community of Oakhaven, once complacent, had been stirred awake by a simple act of injustice. The spark had ignited. Brian Campbell, the quiet carpenter, was no longer just a victim. He was becoming a symbol. 7. Unmasking the truth. The impact of the community's outrage, coupled with Sarah Jenkins' relentless legal pressure, forced the Oak Haven Police Department to expedite the release of the official body camera footage from Officer Ethan Vance. The anticipation was palpable, both within the legal team and across the increasingly vocal community. Everyone knew that this footage held the key, either to corroborating the official narrative or to dismantling it entirely. When Sarah received the video files, she gathered Brian, Eleanor, and Marcus Thorne in her office. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Brian, though dreading the reliving of the humiliation, felt a grim determination. Eleanor clutched a tissue, her eyes fixed on the screen. Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed, ready to analyze every frame. Sarah started the playback. The initial shaky footage showed Officer Vance's approach, his boots crunching on the gravel of Eleanor's driveway. His voice, clear and authoritative, cut through the sounds of chirping birds. "Sir, step away from the vehicle, now!" The camera angle, mounted on Vance's chest, gave a direct, unvarnished perspective. It captured Brian, standing calmly by the open hood, mug in hand, his face etched with confusion rather than defiance. It showed Eleanor, stepping forward, her words clear. "Officer, wait! He's not doing anything wrong. This is Brian Campbell, my neighbor." The footage continued, frame by agonizing frame, exposing the stark reality of the confrontation. It showed Vance's rigid posture, his unwavering focus on Brian, his dismissive hand gesture towards Eleanor. It captured Brian's calm attempts to explain, his clear statement that his ID was in his blocked truck. It recorded Vance's repeated, unyielding demands for compliance, his refusal to acknowledge Eleanor, and his escalating threats of arrest. "You're interfering with an investigation, sir. That's a crime. I asked for your ID. Produce it now, or you will be arrested for obstruction." Vance's voice, cold and procedural, rang through the office. Then came the moment of physical contact. Vance reaching for Brian's arm, Brian's slight flinch, his refusal to turn around. Vance's aggressive movement behind him, the twisting of his arm, the painful snap of the handcuffs, Brian's pained gasp, Eleanor's desperate cry. The entire sequence, raw and uncensored, unfolded before their eyes. What the official report described as resisting arrest was clearly Brian standing his ground, refusing to passively submit to what he perceived as an unjust detention. What was labeled obstruction was Brian's attempt to logically explain the situation and retrieve his identification from his blocked vehicle. The footage revealed an officer who seemed determined to find defiance where there was only confusion and to escalate a situation that could have been resolved with a single question to Eleanor. When the footage ended, a heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor was openly weeping, her head in her hands. Marcus sat back, his face grim, a quiet fury burning in his eyes. Brian, though reliving the trauma, felt a profound sense of vindication. The truth, in its raw, visual form, was undeniable. "This is exactly what we needed," Sarah finally said, her voice steady, but with an underlying steel. This contradicts Officer Vance's report on almost every critical point. His claim of active resistance is clearly refuted. His failure to de-escalate, his refusal to listen to a credible witness, Eleanor, and his immediate jump to arrest for a non-existent crime. It's all here, in his own footage. Marcus nodded slowly. This isn't just a misinterpretation. This is an intentional misrepresentation of facts. He saw what he wanted to see, and when the reality didn't fit, he created his own version. Sarah then played the various bystander videos. These, though sometimes shakier or from different angles, corroborated the official body cam footage perfectly. One particularly clear clip, taken by a neighbor directly across the street, showed the exact moment Vance grabbed Brian, capturing Brian's look of shock and the rapid, aggressive way the cuffs were applied. It further cemented the narrative of an unjustified arrest. "And the dispatch recording?" Brian asked, his voice still a little hoarse. "What did that say?" Sarah played a short audio clip. "Caller reports suspicious activity, possible vehicle theft, African-American male under the hood of an SUV, elderly woman went inside, leaving him alone with the vehicle." Marcus scoffed. "So, suspicious activity based on a racist assumption, not any actual criminal behavior. And the elderly woman went inside detail clearly meant to imply she was a victim, not the person who asked for the help." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "The combination of the dispatch call and Vance's immediate, aggressive response on the body cam paints a very clear picture. He arrived on scene with a preformed bias, and then actively ignored any evidence that contradicted it. This is a textbook case of policing based on perception and stereotype, not fact." Brian looked at the screen, a new resolve hardening his features. "So, what's next, Sarah, this footage? This has to change everything, right?" "It changes everything for us," Sarah confirmed. "The district attorney's office will see this. Internal Affairs will see this. The public will definitely see this. We are immediately filing a motion to dismiss all charges against you, Mr. Campbell. Based on lack of probable cause and clear evidence of false arrest, we will also be releasing this footage to the media in full, as soon as legally possible. The court of public opinion is already on your side, but this will seal it," Marcus added. "And then, we demand accountability, not just for Officer Vance, but for the system that allowed this to happen. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern. And with this footage, Brian, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for everyone in this community who's ever been judged before they've even had a chance to speak." Brian looked at the darkened screen. The image of his handcuffed self still burned into his mind. The humiliation was still fresh, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. The truth had been unmasked, stark and undeniable. And with that truth came power, the power to fight, and the power to demand change. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. 8. The weight of vindication. The unedited body camera footage, swiftly released to the public by Sarah Jenkins's office, exploded across local news channels and social media platforms. The impact was immediate and devastating for the Oak Haven Police Department and, particularly, for Officer Ethan Vance. The raw, unfiltered video, depicting Brian's calm demeanor against Vance's aggressive commands and refusal to listen, became a viral sensation. News anchors spoke of egregious overreach and racial profiling in suburbia. Community leaders voiced outrage. The video was played on repeat, scrutinizing every micro-expression, every dismissive gesture, every word spoken. The pressure on the district attorney's office was immense. Public outcry, fueled by Marcus Thorne's persistent advocacy and Eleanor Vance's poignant testimony, demanded swift action. Within 48 hours of the footage's release, Sarah received the call she had been expecting. "Miss Jenkins," the assistant district attorney, Mr. Davies, stated, his voice clipped and formal. "Regarding the case of Brian Campbell, we've reviewed all available evidence, including the body camera footage from Officer Vance and the witness statements. We've concluded that the charges of obstruction of justice and resisting arrest are not prosecutable." He paused, then continued. "We are officially moving to dismiss all charges, effective immediately." Sarah felt a surge of triumph, but kept her voice professional. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. We appreciate your office's timely review and appropriate decision." She knew the words were a formality. The DA's office had no choice. The evidence was simply too compelling. The public outcry too loud. She immediately called Brian, who was at home with his wife, Clara, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy. "Brian," Sarah announced, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "The district attorney's office is dismissing all charges against you. You are officially exonerated." A moment of stunned silence on the other end, then Clara's joyful gasp and Brian's quiet. "Thank God. Thank you. Sarah. Thank you." The news brought immense relief, a lifting of the suffocating weight that had pressed down on Brian and his family. Friends and neighbors flooded his home with calls, texts, and visits, celebrating his vindication. Eleanor Vance, tears of joy streaming down her face, brought him a freshly baked apple pie. "I knew it. Brian, I knew they couldn't keep a good man down." Yet, amidst the celebration, Brian felt a peculiar emptiness, a sense of vindication that was bittersweet. He was free, his name cleared, but the experience had fundamentally changed him. He couldn't simply go back to being the quiet carpenter, the friendly neighbor who occasionally jumped a car battery. The weight of his experience, the stark reality of how easily his life had been upended, settled deep in his bones. Later that evening, sitting on his porch with Clara, the evening air cool and comforting, Brian articulated his feelings. "I'm relieved. Clara, more relieved than I can say. But it's not over. Not for me. What happened today? It wasn't just a mistake. It was wrong. It was so wrong. And if it can happen to me, with a good lawyer and a supportive community, what about someone else? Someone without a neighbor like Eleanor, without a lawyer like Sarah, without a community like Oakhaven United?" Clara, holding his hand, squeezed it gently. "I know. Brian, it's terrifying to think about, but you're safe now. We can try to put this behind us." Brian shook his head slowly. "I don't think I can. Honey, not completely. I saw how quickly a routine situation could turn into a nightmare. I felt the handcuffs, the cold bench, the dehumanizing process. I saw how an officer's bias could override all common sense, all truth. And I saw how powerful community action was in getting justice." He paused, looking out at the darkening street, where the friendly houses glowed with warm lights, a stark contrast to the harsh blue flashes of Vance's patrol car just days ago. "I can't unsee it. Clara," he continued, his voice low but firm, "and I can't pretend it didn't happen. It's not enough that I'm free. What about the next Brian Campbell? What about the next Eleanor Vance? This system, it needs to change." Clara looked at her husband, recognizing the fire in his eyes. It was a different kind of fire than she was used to seeing, not the passionate spark for a new carpentry project, but a quiet, burning resolve for justice. She knew him well enough to know that when Brian set his mind to something, he saw it through. Meanwhile, within the Oakhaven Police Department, the internal fallout was just beginning. The body camera footage, while exonerating Brian, had opened a Pandora's box of scrutiny on Officer Vance. Internal Affairs immediately launched an investigation into his conduct. Vance found himself isolated, his initial report crumbling under the weight of the undeniable video evidence. His supervisors, initially backing him, now faced intense pressure from both the public and city officials. The vindication of Brian Campbell was also a damning indictment of Officer Vance. Brian's name was cleared, his freedom restored, but the experience had forged a new purpose within him. The quiet carpenter was gone, replaced by a man acutely aware of injustice and determined to fight it. The taste of vindication, while sweet, carried with it the heavy realization that his fight was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a much larger battle for accountability, for systemic change, and for ensuring that no one else in his community, or any community, would have to endure what he had. 9. From victim to advocate. The dismissal of charges was not an ending for Brian Campbell. It was a profound beginning. The lingering humiliation and frustration of his false arrest transformed into a powerful wellspring of purpose. He found that he couldn't return to his workshop and simply carve wood, no matter how much he loved the craft. The images of the handcuffs, Eleanor's distressed face, and Officer Vance's unyielding gaze were etched into his memory, a constant reminder of the fragile line between everyday life and systemic injustice. His newfound resolve was strengthened by the unwavering support of Marcus Thorne and Oakhaven United. Marcus, recognizing Brian's unique position, a man who had directly experienced injustice but also had the credibility and calm demeanor to speak about it powerfully, saw a natural leader. "Brian, what happened to you was awful," Marcus told him during one of their many coffees. "But it also gave you a voice, a platform. People listen to you. They see themselves in your story. You can make a real difference, not just for Oakhaven, but for other communities too." Brian, after much introspection and long conversations with Clara, agreed. He formally joined Oakhaven United, initially volunteering his time, then quickly becoming a driving force within the organization. He didn't just attend meetings, he helped strategize, organize, and articulate the demand for change. His calm, reasoned approach, coupled with the undeniable truth of his experience, made him an incredibly effective advocate. He wasn't a professional activist. He was an ordinary man who had been pushed to act by extraordinary circumstances. Together, Brian and Marcus co-founded a new initiative under the Oakhaven United umbrella, Justice for All. Its mission was clear and ambitious: to champion police accountability, educate the community on their civil rights, and advocate for meaningful policy reforms within law enforcement. Brian's first major project was a series of Know Your Rights workshops. Leveraging his own experience, he developed practical scenarios and engaged local legal experts, including Sarah Jenkins, to teach community members how to interact with law enforcement safely and effectively. He explained in clear, accessible language what to do if stopped by police, the importance of remaining calm, and the right to remain silent. Crucially, he emphasized the importance of documenting interactions, gently reminding people about the power of their phones, just like the bystander footage that saved him. "You have rights," Brian would tell packed community halls, his voice resonating with sincerity. "But those rights are only as strong as your willingness to assert them, and your knowledge of how to do so. And when those rights are violated, we, as a community, must stand together and demand accountability." He never preached. He simply shared his story and empowered others with knowledge. Justice for All quickly became a formidable force in Oakhaven. They organized peaceful protests and vigils, drawing attention to cases of police misconduct, both local and national. They meticulously tracked complaints against officers, analyzing data for patterns of behavior and identifying areas ripe for reform. Brian, with his background in carpentry, even helped design and build a mobile Justice for All education unit, a van equipped with screens and pamphlets that could travel to different neighborhoods, reaching residents who might not attend traditional meetings. One of their most significant early victories was the successful lobbying for a community oversight board within the Oakhaven Police Department. Brian testified passionately at city council meetings, using his personal narrative as a powerful anchor. "This isn't about being anti-police," he stated, looking directly at the city council members. "This is about ensuring that our police department serves and protects all members of our community, equally and justly. An independent oversight board provides an essential check and balance, a mechanism for transparency and trust. The pushback was fierce. Some members of the police union and city council argued that such a board would handcuff officers and undermine their authority. But Brian, supported by Marcus and the overwhelming voice of the community, countered every argument with calm logic and irrefutable facts. He pointed to the body camera footage of his own arrest, reminding them how easily a narrative could be spun without independent verification. He cited statistics on racial disparities in arrests and stops. Transparency, Brian emphasized, isn't a threat to good policing. It's a foundation for it. It builds trust, and trust is the most powerful tool law enforcement has. The debate raged for months, but ultimately, the sheer weight of public opinion, galvanized by Brian's story and the tireless efforts of Justice for All, swayed the council. The Oak Haven Community Oversight Board was established, a significant step towards greater police accountability. Brian also became a sought-after speaker at state-level conferences on civil liberties and police reform. His story, resonating with authenticity and quiet power, became a rallying cry for activists across the state. He didn't fit the typical mold of a public speaker. He wasn't charismatic in an overt way, but his sincerity, his palpable conviction, and the stark reality of his experience made him deeply compelling. He consistently brought the conversation back to individual dignity, to the simple right to be treated with respect, and to the profound impact of wrongful actions on real lives. As months turned into a year, Brian Campbell, the quiet carpenter, had fully transformed. He was no longer merely a victim. He was a leader, a tireless advocate, a public face for the burgeoning movement for police reform. His journey, born out of a simple misunderstanding and an unjust arrest, had blossomed into a profound commitment to justice for all. He had found his calling, not in the quiet solitude of his workshop, but in the challenging, often tumultuous arena of public advocacy, and the community, watching his evolution, saw not just a man fighting for his rights, but a champion for theirs. 10. Architecting change from outside with the Community Oversight Board in place and the Know Your Rights workshops gaining traction, Brian Campbell and Justice for All focused their efforts on more systemic policy changes within the Oak Haven Police Department. They understood that external pressure, consistently applied, was often the only way to compel an institution to examine and alter its internal workings. Brian, armed with data collected from community complaints and legal analysis provided by Sarah Jenkins, became an architect of change from outside the very walls that had once held him captive. Their initial targets were policies surrounding de-escalation, use of force, and citizen complaint procedures. Brian and Marcus meticulously researched best practices from other police departments nationwide that had successfully implemented reform. They presented detailed proposals to the Oak Haven City Council and the police department's command staff, leaving no room for ambiguity. The current de-escalation training is insufficient, Brian stated calmly during a public forum, projecting a slide with comparative data. Officer Vance's interaction with me is a clear example. He escalated a non-threatening situation immediately. Our proposal calls for mandatory, ongoing de-escalation training, not just for new recruits, but for every officer, focusing on communication, empathy, and tactical retreat when appropriate. We believe this will reduce unnecessary confrontations and foster trust. He emphasized that de-escalation wasn't about avoiding crime. It was about effective policing, ensuring officer and citizen safety. He often drew parallels to his carpentry work. Just like building a house, if the foundation isn't solid, the whole structure is compromised. Trust is the foundation of effective policing. The proposals met with significant resistance from the Police Benevolent Association, PBA, the police union, their spokesperson, a gruff veteran officer named Sergeant Miller, publicly denounced Justice for All's efforts as anti-police rhetoric that would endanger officers and tie their hands. These so-called activists have no idea what it's like on the street, Miller scoffed in a local news interview. They want to micromanage every decision. Officers need to be able to make split-second choices without fear of reprisal from some civilian board or busybody organization. Brian, however, refused to be drawn into a shouting match. He responded with calm, articulate arguments, backed by facts and statistics. "We are not anti-police," Brian countered during a televised town hall. "We are anti-misconduct. We support good officers who uphold their oath. But a few bad apples can spoil the barrel, and a system that protects those bad apples, rather than holding them accountable, harms every officer who serves honorably." Justice for All organized peaceful demonstrations outside police headquarters, distributed informational flyers detailing their reform proposals, and launched a highly effective social media campaign using the hashtag Oakhaven Demands Justice. They encouraged citizens to share their own experiences, creating a powerful collective narrative that was impossible for the department to ignore. A pivotal moment came when Justice for All successfully lobbied for a review of the department's use of force policy. Sarah Jenkins drafted a comprehensive legal brief, citing case law and national best practices, arguing for stricter guidelines, increased transparency in reporting incidents, and immediate independent review of all serious force incidents. Brian, leveraging his personal story, spoke passionately about the chilling effect of unchecked power. "When an officer knows they can act with impunity," Brian testified before the city council, "it creates an environment where discretion can turn into discrimination, and a badge can become a shield for injustice. A clear, strict use of force policy protects both the public and the officers who operate within those boundaries." The political landscape in Oakhaven was shifting. Mayor Thompson, initially hesitant to alienate the police union, began to feel the growing pressure from his constituents. The body camera footage of Brian's arrest continued to be a potent reminder of the cost of inaction. Emily Vance, still a fierce advocate, made sure of it, writing letters to the editor and speaking at every public meeting. Eventually, the pressure became undeniable. The city council, in a series of tightly contested votes, passed several key reforms championed by Justice for All. Mandatory de-escalation training. All officers, from rookies to veterans, would undergo annual, intensive de-escalation and crisis intervention training, revised use of force policy. The department adopted a duty to intervene clause, requiring officers to stop excessive force by colleagues, and mandated that de-escalation must be attempted before any use of force where feasible. Enhanced citizen complaint review. The process for filing and investigating citizen complaints was streamlined and made more transparent, with the newly established Community Oversight Board playing a significant role in review. These victories were hard-won, requiring months of relentless advocacy, meticulous research, and the unwavering commitment of Brian, Marcus, Sarah, and the entire Justice for All network. They were architects of change from the outside, using the tools of democracy, petition, protest, public education, and persistent lobbying to reshape a resistant institution. Officer Ethan Vance, meanwhile, was experiencing the direct consequences of this shifting landscape. The internal affairs investigation into his conduct during Brian's arrest lingered. Protracted by legal wrangling, but ultimately moving towards a conclusion, the body camera footage, which had been the catalyst for so much external change, was also serving as undeniable evidence within his own department's disciplinary process. The weight of Justice for All's external pressure meant that his actions could no longer be quietly swept under the rug. Brian, having personally felt the sting of injustice, was now instrumental in ensuring that those who wielded power did so with responsibility and accountability. The quiet ripple effect of his arrest had become a powerful wave, slowly but surely reforming the very department that had once wronged him. 11. Reckoning for Officer Vance. The Internal Affairs investigation into Officer Ethan Vance's conduct during Brian Campbell's arrest dragged on for months, a process deliberately slow-footed by the police department in an attempt to weather the public storm. However, the sustained pressure from Justice for All, amplified by media scrutiny, and the unwavering advocacy of Marcus Thorne and Brian himself, ensured that the case remained in the public eye. Every week, Justice for All released updates, reminding the community that accountability had not yet been achieved. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Internal Affairs report was finalized and its findings released. The report concluded that Officer Vance had indeed violated several departmental policies, including failure to de-escalate, his immediate use of commands rather than attempting to understand the situation or engage in verbal de-escalation, lack of probable cause for arrest. His decision to arrest Brian for obstruction and resisting was found to be unjustified, given Eleanor's immediate corroboration and Brian's attempts to comply despite his truck being blocked. Misrepresentation in official reports. The discrepancy between his written report and the undeniable evidence of his own body camera footage was a significant finding. Discourtesy and unprofessional conduct. His dismissive attitude towards Eleanor Vance and his aggressive demeanor were cited. The Oak Haven police chief, Chief Harrison, a man who had initially defended Vance, now faced an untenable position. The public trust in his department had eroded significantly, and the mayor's office was demanding decisive action. Chief Harrison, a veteran of the force, knew that failing to act would only perpetuate the crisis of confidence. In a press conference that was broadcast live across the city, Chief Harrison announced the disciplinary actions against Officer Vance. His voice was somber, reflecting the gravity of the situation. After a thorough and impartial investigation by Internal Affairs and review by the Community Oversight Board, we have found that Officer Ethan Vance engaged in conduct that was not consistent with the values and training of the Oak Haven Police Department. His actions on the morning of Mr. Brian Campbell's arrest fell short of the professional standards we expect from our officers. He then laid out the consequences. Officer Vance would receive a 30-day unpaid suspension, would be required to undergo extensive retraining in de-escalation, bias recognition, and community policing, and would be formally reprimanded with a permanent mark on his service record. Furthermore, he would be reassigned to a different district upon his return, away from direct community contact for a probationary period. While some within Justice for All felt the punishment wasn't severe enough, pushing for termination, Brian, surprisingly, expressed a more nuanced view. "This is a step," he stated in a press conference held moments after Chief Harrison's announcement. "It's not perfect. It doesn't undo the harm, but for the first time, an officer who acted unjustly has been formally held accountable for his actions in this department. This shows that the system, when pressured, can indeed move towards justice. It's a testament to the power of community advocacy and the reforms we have pushed for." Marcus Thorne echoed Brian's sentiments. "This is a victory for accountability. It sends a clear message that officers cannot operate with impunity. It's a direct result of the community's persistent demands and the establishment of the Community Oversight Board. We will continue to monitor Officer Vance's retraining and reassignment closely." Officer Vance himself remained largely out of the public eye during this period. His colleagues, some sympathetic, others critical, mostly kept their distance. The incident had made him a pariah within the department, not just because of the public outrage, but because his own body camera footage had betrayed him, providing irrefutable evidence against his own written word. He saw the disdain in some of his veteran peers' eyes, the quiet judgment from supervisors. The sense of isolation was profound. During his mandatory retraining sessions, led by seasoned instructors who pulled no punches, Vance was forced to watch his own footage repeatedly, dissecting every error, every missed opportunity for de-escalation, every moment where bias seemed to influence his decision-making. He sat through sessions on implicit bias, community relations, and the vital importance of building trust, not just asserting authority. It was a humiliating and deeply uncomfortable experience, forcing him to confront the flaws in his own judgment and the devastating impact of his actions on an innocent man and the wider community. He realized, with a bitter taste, that his arrogance and quickness to judge had not only ruined Brian Campbell's morning, but had irrevocably damaged his own career and reputation. The reckoning for Officer Vance, while a difficult and painful process for him, served as a powerful symbolic victory for justice for all. It proved that their efforts were not in vain, that the reforms they advocated could lead to tangible consequences for misconduct. It also solidified Brian Campbell's position as a leading voice for police accountability. He had not only survived an unjust system, he was actively changing it, slowly but surely, from the outside in. The taste of this hard-won justice was a powerful motivator, pushing Brian to envision even greater transformations for his community. 12. An unlikely path to leadership. Months after Officer Vance's disciplinary actions, a new seismic shift rocked the Oak Haven Police Department. Chief Harrison, citing personal reasons and the need for fresh leadership, abruptly announced his early retirement. The news, though not entirely unexpected given the department's tumultuous year, sent ripples through the city. The vacant position of police chief became a focal point for Oak Haven, a symbol of either continued struggle or radical transformation. Immediately, discussions began about who would fill the role. Traditional candidates from within the department were considered, as were experienced chiefs from other cities. But something unprecedented began to stir within the community that Brian Campbell and Justice for All had so effectively galvanized. Whispers grew into murmurs, and murmurs into a resounding chorus. Brian Campbell. The idea was audacious, almost unthinkable. Brian, a civilian carpenter, a man who had been unjustly arrested by the very department he was now being asked to lead, to become its chief? It defied all conventional wisdom, all established protocols for police leadership. Yet, it made a profound, undeniable sense to the people of Oak Haven. Marcus Thorne was among the first to voice the idea publicly, initially tentatively, then with increasing conviction. Who better to reform the Oak Haven Police Department than the man who exposed its deepest flaws? Marcus declared at a Justice for All rally. Who better to rebuild trust than the man who lost his dignity to that department, yet chose to fight for it, not against it? Brian Campbell understands accountability from the inside out. Eleanor Vance, now a beloved community icon in her own right, became one of Brian's most fervent champions. She spoke passionately at neighborhood gatherings, her voice clear and strong despite her age. Brian knows what it's like to be on the other side of that badge, she told an attentive crowd. He knows what it feels like to be unheard. That's the kind of understanding we need in our police chief. Someone who remembers what it's like to be just a citizen. The movement for Brian to run for chief gained momentum quickly. Petitions circulated, not just for reforms, but for Brian's candidacy. His phone, which once rang with calls for carpentry estimates, now buzzed with requests for interviews about his potential mayoral bid. Local media, initially incredulous, began to cover the story with increasing seriousness. From arrested to chief? One headline blared, capturing the public imagination. Brian, initially, was overwhelmed. The idea had never once crossed his mind. His passion was for advocacy, for external pressure, for holding the system accountable. to actually enter the system, to become the very authority figure he had been challenging, felt like a bewildering leap. He spent long nights discussing it with Clara. "Chief of police? Brian?" Clara asked gently, a mix of pride and trepidation in her voice. "That's a huge undertaking. It's not just policy debates anymore. It's budgets, personnel, crises, union battles, everything." "I know." Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's an entirely different kind of fight. But if I don't, then who? Will they just pick another chief from the old guard? Someone who'll pay lip service to reform but ultimately maintain the status quo? All the work we've done. Could it just be undone?" He wrestled with the decision for weeks. He was a carpenter, a builder. He understood structures, foundations, and the meticulous work required to construct something strong and lasting. Could he apply that same principle to a broken police department? Could he build trust where it had been shattered? Could he lead officers, some of whom might resent his very presence, towards a new vision of community policing? He sought counsel from Sarah Jenkins, who, despite her initial surprise, saw the strategic brilliance in the idea. "Brian, you have a unique credibility. You're not an outsider telling them what's wrong. You're a symbol of what went wrong and how it can be fixed. That's a powerful narrative. You'd face immense challenges, but you'd also have unprecedented public backing." He also spoke at length with Marcus Thorne. "Brian, this is bigger than any of us. This is about changing the very fabric of how law enforcement interacts with the community. You are the embodiment of that change. You'd be starting from a place of public trust that no traditional candidate could ever hope to achieve." The weight of the community's expectation, coupled with the profound opportunity for meaningful, lasting change, eventually became undeniable. Brian realized that this wasn't just about a job, it was about a mission, a moral imperative that had emerged from his own crucible of injustice. He called a press conference, standing beside Clara, Eleanor, and Marcus. The anticipation was electric. Brian, typically reserved, looked out at the assembled reporters and flashing cameras, a quiet determination in his eyes. "When I was unjustly arrested," Brian began, his voice clear and resonant, "I never imagined I would stand here today, considering such a profound decision. My fight was to hold power accountable from the outside. But Oakhaven has spoken. They have asked for a different kind of leadership, a different path forward. They have asked for someone who understands what it truly means to serve and protect. Someone who has felt the sharp end of injustice." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Therefore, after much thought and reflection, and with the unwavering support of my family and this community, I announce my intention to seek the position of Chief of Police for the city of Oakhaven. I will strive to lead a department that is transparent, accountable, and deeply connected to the community it serves. A department where every citizen, regardless of their background, feels safe, respected, and heard. A department that truly upholds the principles of justice for all." The room erupted. The quiet carpenter was now running for police chief, embarking on an unlikely, unprecedented path to leadership, ready to reform the very department that had once treated him so unjustly. The journey from victim to advocate had found its most remarkable, most challenging, and most hopeful direction yet. 13. The campaign of a lifetime. Brian Campbell's announcement sent shockwaves through Oakhaven and beyond. The idea of a civilian, particularly one who had been unjustly arrested by the department, running for chief of police was unprecedented. The local news buzzed with debates, analysis, and speculation. For many, it was a breath of fresh air, a symbol of radical change. For others, particularly within the traditional law enforcement establishment, it was an alarming challenge to long-held institutions and expertise. His campaign for police chief was unlike any other. It wasn't about flashy advertisements or political posturing. It was a grassroots movement, deeply rooted in the community that had championed him. Marcus Thorne, taking a temporary leave from Oak Haven United, became Brian's campaign manager, bringing his organizational prowess and strategic mind to the effort. Sarah Jenkins offered legal counsel and advice, ensuring all campaign actions were compliant and ethically sound. Eleanor Vance, now affectionately known as Grandma Eleanor by the campaign team, became Brian's most endearing and passionate surrogate. Telling her story at every opportunity, Brian's campaign message was simple, yet profound: trust, transparency, and community. He spoke not of tough-on-crime rhetoric, but of smart-on-crime strategies, emphasizing prevention, de-escalation, and community engagement. He proposed concrete reforms, expanding mental health crisis response teams, implementing rigorous anti-bias training, diversifying the police force, and truly embedding the Community Oversight Board's recommendations into daily operations. "I know what it feels like to be unheard," Brian would say at town halls, his voice resonating with sincerity. "I know what it feels like for a simple interaction to escalate into injustice. My promise to this city is a police department that listens, that respects, and that truly serves every single person, regardless of their skin color, their neighborhood, or their circumstance. A police department that earns your trust every single day." He faced immense skepticism, particularly from the incumbent chief's hand-picked interim successor, Captain Robert Sterling, a career officer with a solid reputation but deeply ingrained in the department's existing culture. Sterling's campaign focused on experience and maintaining order, portraying Brian as an idealistic outsider, unqualified for the complexities of police leadership. "This isn't a popularity contest, Mr. Campbell," Captain Sterling stated dismissively during a televised debate. "Being chief of police requires years of law enforcement experience, tactical knowledge, understanding of complex regulations, and the respect of the men and women on the force. It's not a job for an activist." Brian responded with calm conviction. "Captain Sterling, respect is earned, not given by rank. My experience may not be in wearing a badge, but it is in experiencing the consequences of policing that lacks accountability. My experience is in listening to this community, in seeing where the cracks in the system are, and in building solutions from the ground up. I may not have worn a uniform, but I've learned about policing in a way few other candidates ever have, from the perspective of the policed." He often used analogies from his carpentry background. You can have the most experienced plumber, but if he keeps patching leaks with faulty materials, the house will eventually crumble. Sometimes, you need a different builder, someone who understands the structure, who can rebuild the foundation correctly. That's what I offer Oak Haven. The campaign trail was grueling. Brian shook countless hands, attended innumerable community events, and engaged in dozens of debates. He navigated uncomfortable questions about his lack of police training, his past arrest, and his vision for a department that some feared would be soft on crime. Yet, his honesty, integrity, and genuine commitment to reform resonated deeply with a public yearning for change. The body camera footage of his arrest, far from being a liability, became his most potent campaign tool. Marcus strategically re-released edited clips, juxtaposing Brian's calm explanations with Vance's escalating aggression. It wasn't used to demonize the entire police force, but to illustrate the very problem Brian promised to fix: a lack of empathy, a rush to judgment, and the unchecked power that could dismantle an innocent life. This is not about being anti-police. It's about being pro-community, pro-justice, and pro-effective policing, Brian would clarify repeatedly. We need officers who understand the communities they serve, who are trained to de-escalate, and who are held accountable when they step out of line. Support for Brian swelled across Oak Haven, Donations poured in, volunteers flocked to his campaign headquarters, and endorsements from unexpected quarters, including several retired officers who had witnessed the department's stagnation, began to emerge. These retired officers spoke of Brian's vision as a necessary evolution, a chance for the department to heal its relationship with the community. On election day, the polls were packed. The air was thick with anticipation. Brian, Clara, Eleanor, and Marcus waited anxiously as the results trickled in. It was a tight race, a testament to the deep divisions within the city regarding the future of its police force. As the final precinct reported, the numbers flashed across the screen. Brian Campbell, 52%, Captain Robert Sterling, 48%. A gasp. Then a roar erupted from Brian's campaign headquarters. He had won. The carpenter, the falsely arrested civilian, had defied all expectations. He had been elected chief of police for the city of Oakhaven. Brian, his face etched with exhaustion, but shining with profound humility and resolve, hugged Clara tightly, then Eleanor, who was sobbing with joy. He looked out at the cheering crowd, his journey from a simple misunderstanding to an unlikely leader now complete. The campaign of a lifetime had ended, but the real work, the daunting, transformative work, was just beginning. He was about to step inside the very institution that had wronged him, not as a prisoner, but as its chief architect of change. 14, a mandate for reform. The morning after the election, the reality of Brian Campbell's victory settled over Oakhaven with a mix of awe and anticipation. The headlines screamed, "Civilian activist elected Oakhaven police chief. From handcuffs to command, Campbell to lead OPD." It was a historic moment, a true testament to the power of community and the burning desire for change. Brian, the quiet carpenter, was now Chief-elect Campbell, entrusted with the profound mandate of transforming the very department that had once subjected him to injustice. His transition into office was anything but smooth. The Oakhaven Police Department, steeped in decades of tradition and an inherent resistance to external interference, was a challenging environment. While the public had overwhelmingly voted for Brian, many within the rank and file viewed him with skepticism. If not outright resentment, he was seen by some as an outsider, an activist, an unqualified civilian forced upon them by public opinion. On his first day, Brian walked into police headquarters, not in a uniform, but in a tailored suit, his bearing calm and resolute. Marcus Thorne and Sarah Jenkins accompanied him, symbolizing the community and legal support that had propelled him to this unprecedented position. The atmosphere inside was palpably tense. Officers avoided eye contact, their faces impassive. The silence in the hallways was deafening, broken only by the click of his shoes on the polished floor. Brian immediately requested a meeting with his command staff. He sat at the head of a long conference table, facing a semicircle of captains, lieutenants, and sergeants, many of whom had served for decades. Captain Sterling, his recent opponent, sat among them, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, gentlemen and ladies," Brian began, his voice steady, projecting an authority born not of rank, but of conviction. "I know many of you have questions, concerns, perhaps even reservations about my appointment, and that's understandable. I'm not a career police officer. My path here is certainly unconventional." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But let me be clear about one thing. My commitment to this department and to this city is absolute. I respect the dedication and sacrifice of every officer who serves honorably. My goal is not to dismantle this department, but to rebuild it stronger, more effective, and more trusted than ever before. My mandate, given by the people of Oakhaven, is to implement fundamental reforms that ensure justice, transparency, and accountability for everyone." He didn't preach. He laid out his vision with clarity and conviction. He spoke of restoring public trust, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical necessity for effective policing. He outlined his immediate priorities, a comprehensive review of all departmental policies, a renewed focus on de-escalation and community engagement, and a commitment to data-driven decision-making. "I am not here to settle old scores," Brian stated, looking directly at the grim faces around the table. "My experience with Officer Vance, while painful, taught me invaluable lessons about the importance of empathy, de-escalation, and accountability. Those lessons will guide my leadership. I expect every officer, from the newest recruit to the most senior captain, to embrace these principles. We will move forward together or not at all." He acknowledged the difficulties. Change is hard. It requires courage, open-mindedness, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. There will be resistance. There will be disagreements. But I am here to lead that change, and I will not shy away from it. I will support those who embrace this new direction, and I will hold accountable those who resist it. The meeting, lasting over 2 hours, was a mix of tension and careful diplomacy. Brian listened intently to the concerns raised by his command staff, acknowledging their expertise while firmly reiterating his commitment to reform. He knew that winning over the rank and file would be a marathon, not a sprint. His first official act was to meet with the Community Oversight Board, reinforcing their role and committing to a collaborative relationship. He then announced the formation of a Community Police Partnership Task Force, comprised of officers, community leaders, activists, including Marcus Thorne, and mental health professionals, tasked with identifying key areas for improvement and developing concrete action plans. Chief Campbell also moved quickly to address the issue of Officer Vance. While Vance had already served his suspension and undergone retraining, his transfer to a different unit had been met with mixed reactions within the department. Brian, however, made it clear that while he was not seeking retribution, accountability would remain paramount. He ensured that Vance's retraining was rigorous and ongoing, with regular check-ins and evaluations. It was a delicate balance, demonstrating a commitment to rehabilitation while upholding the principle of consequences for misconduct. The PBA, the police union, adopted a cautious stance. While they had vehemently opposed Brian's candidacy, they knew his victory represented an undeniable shift in public sentiment. They prepared for battle, but Brian made it clear he intended to engage, not confront. He initiated regular meetings with union representatives, listening to their concerns about officer safety and morale, while firmly articulating his vision for a department that prioritized both officer well-being and public trust. Brian's transition was a delicate dance between asserting his authority and building bridges. He knew that true reform couldn't be imposed. It had to be cultivated. He carried with him not just the weight of his personal experience, but the hopes of an entire community. His mandate for reform was clear, and he was determined to honor it, one difficult, deliberate step at a time, within the very institution that had once wronged him. 15. Redefining law enforcement. Chief Brian Campbell wasted no time in implementing his sweeping reform agenda. His first 100 days were a whirlwind of policy changes, departmental meetings, and community engagement. He approached the Oak Haven Police Department not as an adversary, but as a complex system in need of strategic restructuring. Much like a master carpenter tackling a challenging renovation, he knew that true transformation required addressing both the visible surfaces and the hidden structural flaws. One of his immediate priorities was revising the use of force policy. Working closely with Sarah Jenkins, who now served as a key legal advisor to the department, and the Community Police Partnership Task Force, he pushed for the adoption of a force continuum that prioritized de-escalation at every step, making lethal force an absolute last resort. The new policy emphasized the sanctity of life. mandating that officers exhaust all other options before resorting to higher levels of force. It also included an explicit duty to intervene clause, requiring officers to report and stop colleagues who used excessive force. This was a direct response to a widespread issue in policing where officers often stood by during misconduct. Next, Chief Campbell overhauled the department's training protocols. He established an Oak Haven Police Academy Advisory Board, including members from Justice for All and local mental health organizations. New recruits and veteran officers alike were subjected to mandatory, comprehensive training modules focusing on implicit bias recognition, workshops designed to make officers aware of their unconscious biases and how they could impact interactions. De-escalation and crisis. Intervention. Intensive scenario-based training, replacing lecture-based learning, to equip officers with practical skills for diffusing tense situations, particularly those involving individuals in mental health crises. Community-oriented policing. Training that shifted the focus from reactive policing to proactive community engagement, emphasizing relationship building, problem solving, and collaboration with residents. Constitutional policing, a renewed emphasis on Fourth Amendment protections and citizens' rights during encounters. He spearheaded the creation of a mental health response unit, partnering Oak Haven officers with trained mental health professionals to respond jointly to calls involving individuals in crisis. This innovative approach reduced violent encounters and ensured that those needing care received it from appropriate specialists, not just law enforcement. To address transparency, Chief Campbell expanded the use of body cameras and mandated their activation in all citizen interactions. He streamlined the process for citizens to access public records, including body camera footage, and ensured that the Community Oversight Board had full access to all investigative files related to officer conduct. He believed that transparency was not just about accountability after the fact, but about building trust and understanding misconduct in the first place. His changes weren't met without internal resistance. Sergeant Miller, the PBA spokesperson, became his most vocal internal critic, accusing Campbell of weakening the force and undermining officer morale. Brian met these challenges head-on. He held regular coffee with the chief sessions, not just with community members, but with officers across all ranks, listening to their concerns, explaining the rationale behind the reforms, and emphasizing that these changes were designed to make policing more effective and more respected, not less. "I understand that change can feel unsettling," Brian told a room full of skeptical officers. "But ask yourselves, do you want to be a department that is feared, or a department that is trusted? Fear creates distance. Trust creates cooperation. These reforms are about equipping you with better tools, better training, and a stronger relationship with the community, which ultimately makes your job safer and more impactful." He also implemented a diversification initiative, actively recruiting new officers from Oak Haven's various ethnic and socio-economic backgrounds, believing that a police force that reflected the diversity of its community would be better equipped to understand and serve it. He sought out candidates not just for their physical prowess, but for their empathy, critical thinking skills, and genuine desire for community service. One significant challenge was managing the legacy of Officer Vance. Brian made it clear that while Vance had served his disciplinary time, his past actions would not be forgotten. Vance, now working in a non-patrol administrative role, found himself under constant scrutiny. Brian's approach was firm but fair. Vance would be given the opportunity to demonstrate genuine change, but any deviation from the new standards would result in immediate and severe consequences. It was a powerful message to the entire force. No one was above accountability. Under Chief Campbell's leadership, the Oak Haven Police Department began to shed its image of an insular, resistant institution and started to evolve into a more responsive, community-centric force. Crime rates, far from skyrocketing as critics had predicted, remained stable, and in some areas even saw a slight decrease due to improved community cooperation and intelligence sharing. Citizen complaints plummeted, and surveys indicated a significant increase in public trust in the police. Brian Campbell, the man who had walked into the department in handcuffs, was now systematically rebuilding it, brick by painstaking brick, ensuring that its new foundation was built on trust, transparency, and the unwavering principle of justice for all. He was redefining what it meant to be a law enforcement officer in Oak Haven, not just for the community, but for the officers themselves. She Liu, the legacy of a leader. Years melted into a decade, and the Oak Haven Police Department, under Chief Brian Campbell's unwavering leadership, had become a national model for progressive policing. The transformation was profound, touching every facet of the department, from its internal culture to its daily interactions with the community. The fear and resentment that once characterized the relationship between Oak Haven residents and their police had largely been replaced by trust and genuine partnership. The tangible impacts were undeniable. Crime rates continued to steadily decline, not through aggressive arrests, but through proactive community engagement and targeted problem-solving. Citizen complaints against officers had dropped by over 70%, a testament to the efficacy of mandatory de-escalation training, implicit bias recognition, and the stringent accountability measures. The Mental Health Response Unit, initially met with skepticism, was now lauded as an unqualified success, dramatically reducing instances of force in crisis situations and ensuring vulnerable individuals received appropriate care. Chief Campbell, no longer just the activist chief, was now a respected figure within law enforcement circles, invited to speak at national conferences. Sharing Oak Haven's success story, he had built a diverse force that truly mirrored the community it served, fostering an internal culture where empathy, critical thinking, and a commitment to justice were valued as highly as tactical prowess. Officers, once resistant, had largely embraced the new paradigm. Recognizing that community trust made their jobs safer and more meaningful, Eleanor Vance, now well into her 80s, remained Brian's proudest supporter. She often sat in on city council meetings, beaming as Chief Campbell presented his quarterly reports. "He did it, you know," she'd tell anyone who would listen, her eyes sparkling. "He really did it. Changed everything." Marcus Thorne, now the executive director of a statewide Justice for All network, often reflected on Brian's journey. Brian showed us that true leadership isn't just about managing an institution, it's about embodying a moral vision. He turned his pain into purpose, and in doing so, he transformed an entire city. And Officer Ethan Vance? He remained with the department, in the administrative role he had been reassigned to. He had completed countless hours of retraining, therapy, and self-reflection. The public humiliation, the internal shame, and the quiet dignity of Brian Campbell's subsequent rise had forced a reckoning within him. He was no longer the arrogant young officer quick to judge. He was quieter, more thoughtful, haunted by his past actions, but slowly, painstakingly, working to redeem himself through diligent service and a humble acceptance of his place. He never spoke to Brian directly about the incident, but a silent acknowledgement, a nod of recognition and perhaps regret, occasionally passed between them in the hallways of the precinct. The legacy of Chief Brian Campbell wasn't just in the policies he implemented or the statistics he improved. It was in the fundamental shift in belief, the conviction that law enforcement could indeed be a force for true justice, not just order. He proved that accountability wasn't a punishment for good officers, but a safeguard for honorable service. He showed that trust was the most powerful weapon in a police department's arsenal, and that it could be rebuilt, even after being shattered. In the quiet aftermath of Chief Campbell's transformative decade, one might reflect on the pivotal moment under that bright morning sun. What if Officer Vance had paused, just for a second longer, to truly listen to Eleanor? What if he had approached with curiosity rather than immediate command, asking a simple, "What's going on here?" instead of declaring an investigation? The scene could have dissolved into a polite exchange. Brian's ID quickly verified, and a grateful "thank you" from Eleanor. Vance might have continued his shift, perhaps a little wiser for the brief pause, his career trajectory undisturbed. Brian would have gone back to his carpentry, his life untouched by the heavy hand of injustice. But Vance, fueled by implicit bias, a quick judgment based on race, and an eagerness to assert authority, chose escalation. He saw a threat where there was a helper, a crime where there was kindness. This mindset, unfortunately common in various forms, often stems from a combination of inadequate training, a culture that prioritizes control over de-escalation, and unchecked personal biases that, when unaddressed, can warp perception and lead to catastrophic errors in judgment. For Brian, while the suffering was immense, his resolute response carved a path not just to personal vindication, but to systemic change. Had he merely succumbed to the humiliation, chosen silence over advocacy, the community would have lost its champion. Always remember that your voice, even when trembling, possesses the power to challenge injustice. His story underscores a profound truth. The right to be treated with dignity is inalienable, and the pursuit of accountability for those who violate it is a moral imperative. What moments in your own life have tested your resolve to stand for what's right? Have you ever witnessed an injustice and wondered how you could make a difference? Share your thoughts below and join the conversation, because when we speak up, we build a better future together.